All right. Thanks everybody for coming to the second track for this year's SkyDogCon. This is my first time attending, so I'm pretty excited. My handle is Ronin, and this talk is from IT to Pentester, and any Pentesters in the room. I found this online. I didn't make my own meme, but oh, it's really hard to see down there. Okay, well, next time I put this together, I'll make it actually legible. I won't read through that whole thing, but it's really funny, and you guys would have laughed if you could have been able to read it. Good start. A little bit about me. So in this presentation, we're going to be walking through my advice and the advice that's been given to me about getting into security in various forms, but specifically talking about becoming an offensive security tester. So I'll be relating a lot to my kind of path and trying to give advice based on what other people have told me as well. But a little bit, my journey, my way was not the only way, and I'm hoping to cover that in here. But for me, I've been in security for about 10 years now, I guess. I started doing research as an undergrad, went through grad school, started hanging out at conferences, started writing some tools. And this was all before I was even in the job market field. I was still in academia. And then since then, for the past 5 years, I've been doing penetration testing along with other side security-related projects. The door just opened behind me, and I'm kind of waiting to be jumped at this point. So my handle is Ronin. I go by JP as well. You can... What's going on back there? He's just really, really paranoid. This curtain doesn't go high enough for things not to be thrown over top of it. That's not going to show up in the audio, but I just heard a doo-doo-doo-doo behind me, lurking. We'll just call those the lurkers. You guys are going to warn me, right? I can trust you guys, so definitely tell me if something's going to be going over my head. Yeah, Doc, which way? So where are you now? So that was, a very brief about me, and I'll give some more references throughout the presentation. But if you're at this talk, you've either fell asleep in the last one and have carried through, or you're actually interested in potentially moving into the security field, which I would hope so, because there is a vast open field of jobs that are unallocated right now that people are trying to get into. And this isn't necessarily a talk about, hey, you can make money, blah, blah, blah. I'm very much, I believe that if you're going to be doing this, you have to be very passionate about it. So that's the avenue that I want to encourage people on, is using your passion to get into this field. But we'll start with where are you now? And you can be anywhere in this realm. If this is kind of what you're feeling at this point in your job career, then maybe it's time for a change, and that change might happen to be going into security, because I'll be honest, it's a lot of fun, and you get to change around, do what you do a lot. It makes every day pretty interesting. So, come on. You guys have seen this show, right? If you haven't seen this show, it doesn't matter if you've ever worked a help desk, which I have, so it just instills in me. What's the automatic response for help desk as the called as the IT support? What should you always say before you even hear the question? No. Well, if you want to keep your job, this is the wrong response for keeping your job. That's if friends call you. If friends call you, then you can respond that way. What's the real response? Turning it off and turning it on again. Yes, and then somebody told me, I can't remember who it was, that said they've now started saying, have you tried turning off and on again 3 times? Just as an additional, call me back later. I don't have time to wait around, and then see if the problem resolves itself. So a lot of people in here are in the technical support field, whether that's help desk or keeping systems up and running. There's a lot of technical background. A lot of developers also in the room, I'm sure, who, again, a lot of my slides are going to be film-based because I'm kind of film buff. So if you've never seen Office Space, you should. It'll make your life seem just that little bit better. Unless she's at your office. I mean, it could be possible that you have an approximate of somebody always selling you. Sounds like somebody has a case of the Mondays. if you're a system administrator, which a lot of people get these two confused, right? If you've ever been a system administrator, then you're this. And if you've ever been a developer to your friends, you're this, which doesn't necessarily mean that they overlap. But you could also be a biologist. So we have a lot of technical people in the crowd, but not all of us have gone down the path of having technical jobs. And I understand some people are still in school, and I'll get to that a little later. But you don't necessarily have to be able to, have the fundamentals of IT or technical background in your job. You can definitely have this as a hobby. And a lot of people, I would say almost everybody who got into this field, it started as a hobby, whether they applied that hobby at work or in their own free time, in some other way. They can do anything else. You could be a cable guy. And again, this is maybe a more obscure reference. So if you're just seeing Jim Carrey showing his nipple through a jail cell, that is the cable guy, which you either would love as a movie or really hate because it's really weird. Or you can be a pop star. And yes, everybody, you're welcome. You have been visually Rickrolled. So I've been putting this little logo everywhere, and I realized I had it on his shirt, and I'm like, wait, what really screams like, was it early 90s, late 80s? When did it come out? When was his smash hit? Nobody here knows, okay. So I decided that earring was probably the exact right placement for mid-80s. I wonder when did it become a thing? I know it's really old. I mean, some people here might not even know, what's Rickrolling? But it was a thing 8 years ago. So no matter where you were, you might want to move into this IT security field. Because again, it's a lot of fun. You can do a lot of interesting things with it. And you've watched Hackers the Movie, and you're like, that's definitely how it really works. I would like to do that because it's very realistic. There's a lot of swirling vine things and equations flow across my screen every day. I can't even keep track of all of them. So at this point, you have the choice of red or blue pill. And I like to think everybody here has kind of already chosen that path because you're at a security conference, right? You've started down the rabbit hole already. But also with this slide, I like that you have the choice of either getting into security or not, or you've got the red team and blue team side of it. So, you've got one side that's the offensive security, and you've got the one side that's defensive security, and you can go down either path. It seems like, the more entertaining side is the offensive side, but it's way easier. If you want to challenge yourself, don't do that. Do defensive side, because when I break into a system, I basically get to say, oh, you had it right 99.9% of the time. I got in that way. It's broken. I got whatever. Drop the mic. I'm out. Good luck fixing it. And then they have to spend the next 6 months to a year patching it or figuring out if they need to implement something else on the network that's fundamental change for blah, blah, blah. It's a huge headache. But it is kind of, you get to control your environment more. So the other side of that is you kind of have, your, a friend of mine told me the phrase of, our job is to tell people their baby's ugly, which sounds horrible, but it kind of is, because it's, when you're the person that's in charge of the security, it's your baby. It's what you've put together. You've put a lot of sweat and tears into this, either your domain or your area of the network. And sometimes you get a lot of leeway, and I find a lot of places that give leeway into it. They get a lot more lockdown environment, hiring people that know what they're doing. But on the red team side, you've got the offensive. You're the guy going in that's either breaking it or testing it in some way. And then you've kind of got forensics. I don't know where exactly people feel that lies, but that's also, it's kind of an in-between area where you're not exactly trying to break into something, but you're doing the cleanup afterwards, so you have to be knowledgeable about both sides of the fence. And I generally think those guys are way smarter than me, because I know the path that I've gone down when I'm testing, but they have to follow through a path based on one or two flags that all right, these things happen, here is our network, figure out everything else. So those are your options. I mean, that's the general broad strokes, kind of the options you can go down. And now here's some steps that I would recommend you take. How many people do pen testing that are in the room here now? Okay, we've got a few. So I want to open up at the end for your advice as well, because I realize I'm giving sort of my advice, and it could be wrong. And so during my presentation, I'll walk through some steps, but in the end, I'll have some time where I want some Q&A, but I appreciate it if you guys would throw in your 2 cents of your experience, because a lot of it, it's not a very easy path. It's not a direct path. There's no single line to get there. And college is a big part of that. So, a lot of jobs in the market, you go to college and you step into this degree path, and then you can get these jobs over here, or this degree path and you can get these jobs over here. There's no real degree path for what we do. As far as I know, there are a lot of schools out there that do security, but they predominantly focus on defensive. While there's some, might get a class or two on offensive security. As far as I know, and I try to keep up with it, there aren't many that just focus on how to test something offensively, or even like a full 4-year degree on forensics. There are a lot of other classes out there and like associate's degrees and stuff in forensics as well. But as far as offensive goes, I haven't seen too many degrees. A background on me, I went to school for computer science and the master's in computer science as well, which was great in my personal journey because in grad school I got to do research, and that's the only reason I'm in this field today is because I had time in school where I was like, okay, I don't have a job now, I don't have all this other stuff going on. It's an encouraging environment for me to push out these tools or do my own research, and everybody there was very supportive. So that was kind of how I got into the field, was volunteering to do some security research and then kind of forking off and doing my own security research, and in graduate school really expanding upon that and actually being able to release some of the research that I had done. Like I wrote some tools during the course of those 2 years that kind of got the ball rolling for me in the field. But that being said, do you need college to get a job in this area? No, you don't. I have plenty of friends that either, left college or never went to it, went straight from high school into some sort of IT job and kind of focused their way over, as I'm kind of talking about here, focused their way into security or happened into it. A lot of people just was like, they actually happened into the position because there was a void, and when they were, pulled out of the hat to say, you're now doing the security track for this job. But if college doesn't feel like the right fit for you, it's not a requirement. There's a talk tomorrow on resume, and I don't know, other than the brief description that was online, I don't know a lot about it, so I'm not going to go a whole lot into that side. But we're kind of looking at the resume side as well a little bit, and so college does look good on a resume if you're looking at HR. Yeah. Yeah, he had a really great point. So it's not checking the box, right? It's not saying college, done. It's going to college because that's what you want to do and you want to learn from there. Because if you're just going to coast through like you might do in high school and not retain anything, then you get out there and you have to relearn everything that they would hire you to do. So I think I didn't harp on that enough, but that's a great point, that you should use it as an asset if it's an asset that you want to acquire. So college, having a 4-year degree, a 2-year degree, going on further than that, it's really because you have the personal motivation that this is what you want to do in the end. Or in college, everybody starts at college has no idea. But if it's a potential path, if you're thinking about going back to college for it just to get that checkbox and just to look good on a resume, I wouldn't recommend it if it's just, again, something as a booster, because that's a lot of money and time spent where it could probably be spent better somewhere else. But if you are in college, I would say absolutely try to get in on research, because it's a very collaborative environment in general. So try to look out for research project, pose your own, even as an undergraduate. Go to a professor and say, hey, I have an idea for this. Maybe I get some credit, or maybe you can help me out. Maybe I can have some lab space. I started as an undergrad doing research and had my own space to work in. It was a big shared space, but I had, a desk, and that really helped me sort of focus on that research while I was there. And I find that a lot of, academia, they love it, especially professors, because if you publish something out of it, they get their name on it no matter what. Like, even if they only read one edit of it, they love that kind of thing. So if you are in college, take advantage of that time, because you get to pick a project that you're kind of passionate about, and you get a lot of resources available to you. So using your current job, so we'll talk about, let's say you're a system administrator. I did that for a little while between grad and undergrad. I was a sysadmin for a department on campus. And that was great for me because I got to, it was a small network, but it was mine. And I was the one in charge of it. So as long as everything maintained well, I might have some free time, and nobody was really limiting what I could do in this network. So I started playing around with some of the tools that I'd really only read about. And we'll get into lab environments a little later on, but in my case, I could start, playing with Nmap a lot. Whereas I'd read about it before, and I might have run 1 or 2 scans at home, some basic stuff. I now had a little bit more free reign to say, Nmap, not harmful. In general, your bosses will say yes, or whoever your supervisor is like, okay, if it's part of your job even a little bit, you can play around with it a lot because it's non-intrusive, so you can get used to how to use the tools. If you're looking at configurations, I was in charge of a Windows domain, so I'd go through Active Directory or all the settings and see what they did and what I could apply, reading up about them, trying to change something if it, broke anything late at night when it's not going to cause an issue. But really, if you're in any sort of field at work that relates to or could potentially relate to security, even if it's not your job description, it's worth stepping up because people are always looking for the security guru of the team, because if something happens or if they need something, they have questions come in, or they have vendors come in, they want kind of a lead person. And even if your job title is not like lead whatever or team lead, they might look to you. And I think a lot of people, as I mentioned before, a lot of people that I know, that was their path. If something happened and they needed somebody to step up to be the security guy, and even if they knew as much about that job as anybody else, they were like, yeah, sure, that sounds interesting. I might spend a few extra hours at night looking into it, or I'll add that onto my plate while I'm at work. And step by step there, you kind of build up until they're like, wow, we actually need somebody to fill a full-time security position. Like, you've been doing this for the past 6 months, you're now our guy. But it doesn't even have to be, technical job. Even if you're not this technical support, if you're not the developer, sysadmin, if you make friends with them and you have your, maybe your local system, or you can support them. People like getting help at work, so if you can prove yourself worthy of being like, hey, no, I know about some of these things over here. I know how web servers work. Would you mind if I try to do some testing for you? It might save you some money, because hiring the outside consultant to come in, nobody wants to look bad. So if you can be the guy that's like, look, I know this isn't part of my job, but I know how to do this stuff. If it's cool with you, I'll do some initial testing and look around and see if I can find some stuff that you can fix before outside auditors or your boss takes a look at it, and you might get in trouble. So there's a lot of things that you can do. The issue is you are having to go above and beyond. So it might be adding more to your plate. So instead of directly changing over to a new job, you're essentially doing more work. But it's very rewarding that year later or something, when you're able to say, no, I've got this skill set in my back pocket, something I might not have been able to acquire while in my normal job. On the flip side, if there's no way in hell you can actually get that scenario working for you, that's also fine. Build a lab, which doesn't have to be quite as extensive as Tesla's lab, which probably costs lots of money. Today, building a lab is very, very cheap because we have virtualization. So your lab environment in general can be a couple of Raspberry Pis or your laptop running 3 virtual machines, which the software is free. A lot of you can get a Linux distribution for free. You can finagle your way into a Windows license or eval copy for temporary use or something like that. There are a lot of articles out there and guides. I had a friend of mine gave a talk last year that I sat in on at a conference, AID in West Virginia, and his entire talk was how to set up VMware. And when I was talking about it, he was like, initially, he was like, hey, I don't, it's not a big talk. I don't really even know if anybody would want to hear it. And the crowd was really engaged because that's one of the best steps you can do is learn how to set up this testing environment. And the first step to that is setting up VMware. So if you have to spend hours and hours and hours figuring out how to set up VMware, that's fine. Because after you get that initial setup going, popping in virtual machines, you're learning how to interact with these tools. In my experience, I had one Christmas break in college where I went home, and this being the backtrack times, I looked through every tool. I set up my own virtual machine, and I was going through every tool that I saw in the backtrack framework that I could find. So it's just clicking on their menu, looking at this sort of tool, seeing a tool name, opening it up, looking at the man page, looking at the help file, looking at it online, which took a considerable amount of time and was boring, and I wasn't actually manually testing anything. But in my lab environment, I was learning the space, which is almost as important as learning the tools, how to use them. I'm constantly referencing guides for tools I haven't used in a year, but I know where to go for it. It's a lot of it's knowing where to get the information, not necessarily retaining it. So if you have your lab environment, you run it once, you might not run it for years later, but you kind of retain, okay, wait, no, this is the tool I need to exploit that, or if I need to test this particular vulnerability, I'll go over here. So I don't want to focus on specific names of tools, trying to go broad. I know I mentioned Backtrack before because that's kind of the most popular pen testing distribution. There's a lot of other ones out there, and I suggest you look into them as well. But I think for learning purposes initially, there's a lot of reference material for Backtrack and now Kali to use, and there's a lot of guides. So their step process has made it very simple for beginning. So again, this is on, even if you don't want to buy any equipment at all, you can set this up on your personal laptop. Using VMware or VirtualBox. I like VirtualBox personally, but both of them are supported as virtual systems, and just play around, practice. So you've got your lab set up now, and now you need to practice. Again, this is the dedicated time outside of work. This isn't you're not getting paid for this. You're missing out on time with friends or watching TV or whatever. But you've got. I swear that my office at home looks pretty similar to this. For various reasons, but a lot of the printouts there and stuff, it's good. Like for me personally, I like to print stuff out as reference manuals sometimes, especially if it's like a material that I'm going through that just an extensive stack. Instead of reading it on the screen, I'll print it out, highlight it, put it on the shelf, and occasionally have to bring it back up, especially if it's more detailed materials. But spend the hours. Again, walking through all the tool sets, we have the offensive side tools as well as the defensive side tools out there. So there are virtual machines that are designed to be attacked, and that's fine because they're residing on your personal lab. So you're not going to get in trouble for it. Just don't let the traffic leave your network, and you can do pretty much anything you want. So you have all the stuff hosted locally. You can carry it around with you. I'm a frequent. I love to go to coffee shops to kind of get out and do something in focus. So you can actually be hacking your own VM at a coffee shop because you don't really have to get on the wireless, which is kind of fun and interesting to do. Also, in pertaining to this, I don't have a specific slide on it. Unfortunately, you have to learn Linux. There's no other way around it. You have to learn how to use Linux to a certain extent. So I should probably back up a little bit and talking about all the tools to download and interact with learn Linux first. So setting up a virtual machine, what I did was basically force it on myself. Years ago, I put Linux as my host system and then just bore with it. I had to figure out why things kept crashing. I had to learn about dependencies. Yeah.
If you're trying to learn, pick up like how to use a Linux terminal and everything, one thing I did is installed Arch Linux on a VirtualBox, which is kind of masochistic, but it's kind of like moving to a foreign country to pick up a new language.
Yeah, his suggestion is, and probably the more reasonable one, was to install it on a virtual machine, and I did that, and then I ignored it. Which people might be more motivated than I was to learn this stuff. So virtual machine is the sane way to go. For me, it was either I install it on my host or I'll never touch it again. And so I did a dual boot with Windows and Linux, and then I was just like, all right, no, boot into, if I can't get it done in Linux, I'll move over, or you could virtualize the Windows side, but I have to get it done here. I have to figure out a way, whatever it is to, and this was years ago, it's a lot easier now. I mean, I use Linux at home a lot, and you've got alternates to Office, and you've got alternates to watching, videos, and you've got the web browsers are the same. So the support level now is very similar, but you can't just interact with the GUI. If you're pointing and clicking your way through, you're not doing it right. You have to open up that scary command prompt and learn what things are. And we do, I've done some training before, and a lot of the times when I'm delivering training, the first several pages are the basics of how to interact with a Linux command line, because you've got 10 commands you can start off with. You're learning a little bit about the file system, and then you gradually add on to them, and then you get awesome advanced using sed, grep, and awk, and you feel awesome because you're creating your own sorting, which sounds really boring. Sorting data is really exciting when you get it to work right. As a huge nerd, again, that's not really enticing to be like, no, come and do pen testing. You get to sort data well. But it's true. You get to interacting with the command line. You can create your own, I don't call it tools, but your own methods of doing things very quickly and easily. Whereas if you had to do this in Windows, A, the tools aren't there, period. There's barely anything installed on Windows because it's hard to interact with. And B, good luck customizing and pulling data out of something. And a lot of the job is do this task, get data back, sort the data so you can use it to exploit something over here. So you can't just always use the tools there. So learning the Linux command line is a must. And if you can do it virtualized, that's awesome. I had to go through the painstaking process of learning it on my own, which again, it's a lot easier now, but practice with that. Outside of security, you could just use it, for your everyday interactions, setting up email and stuff. There are a lot of publications out there, a lot of books about hacking, about security, pen testing, whatever. Read them. They're available at your local bookstore. These aren't things that are like underground books you have to find on sketchy websites that are self-published, blah, blah, blah. No, all this stuff has gone very, very mainstream. There's an underground, but there's a lot of mainstream material out there, and a lot of these books, is this a real book? Actually, I thought, I found it on the internet, so I don't believe that it's true. If it is true, it is? All right, well, I'm not specifically talking about this book. This was just an example that I found that I thought was modified, and apparently it's real. But there are a lot of books out there, and a lot of them, so some general purpose ones, which I would recommend as your first book, kind of finding one that's like Hacker 101. And then there's a lot specific ones, like, wireless or hardware or social engineering or like Metasploit. There's a book on that. I read probably 6 or 7 of those books before I got a job in the field, or as I progressed, I cycled back through them. But they were great. I mean, I consider it almost like if I'm being in a class in school, if that were the book that I learned off of, you could definitely teach an entire course out of a lot of these books. And again, with your lab environment set up, you can actually test some of these tools, because at least for me, reading it is great, but you really get it instilled in you when you're able to run the tool against something. Even if nothing great happens, you don't get in, you're cycling it through, you're practicing more and more. They're not that expensive, and you can find them. Amazon is great, but local bookstores, yeah.
Is there any book in your mind that you refer to?
I'm trying to stay away from my exact favorites, but my advice, Amazon, just look, or some site, just look at the book ratings. I would say that a lot of them are pretty accurate. I find that personally, I don't go back and reference them as much anymore because I'm doing it. But at the time, I mean, I like to highlight books, so I was flipping through and highlighting all the command line version, this, and the important notes about this. I think a lot of the general purpose ones, I don't know if there are any that I would say are bad out there. I mean, maybe I just haven't read any. Yeah. All right, he's trying to call me out. I read gooder, sir. I went through some of the Hacking Exposed series. The only reason I mentioned those is because they're one of the few that are kind of a series of books that cover a wide variety of things. I do a lot of wireless, so I also did some of the several other wireless books, some of the O'Reilly ones. I think they have Hacking Exposed Wireless. There's some other ones that I've read. These social talking about the Metasploit book.
Were there any fictional books that inspired you?
He asked if there were any fictional books. The Hackers the movie was my fictional book. Yeah. I know there are a lot of books out there that do reference this kind of stuff, and some of them are very Hollywood, like again swirling numbers across the screen. Some of them do actually reference real things. I recently read Ready Player One, if anybody's read that. It's a good general book. It's an awesome book, by the way, but they have a few small references to these kind of things in there. I can't think of any specific fictional books that... there are, yeah, what do you say?
Jason Street's Forbidden series.
Yeah, it said the Jason Street's Forbidden series. You said Halo Crypto?
It's actually really good.
It's probably more entertaining than the books I'm talking about. They're exciting when you're into it learning, but they're not really like they're thick, they're dense. You're just reading material, there's nothing fun, there's nothing like poppy about it. They're really just trying to like give you material and move on versus something that's actually like really engaging and you would want to read at night versus all right, I got to study time this.
Other than most books, it's actually looking at technology, AI.
Stuff on AI.
Yeah, it's like
Very good on AI.
That's cool. Yeah, I haven't read too many of those, but I have had friends that have told me that that kind of thing of accurate fiction exists for the field, and I can imagine that's a great way to maybe start there and then trickle down into, okay, now I'm going to actually read the technical book side because I'm kind of motivated now. Because these books are thick and dense, and they're all like 400 pages long. And that's not to discourage you, because it's great, there's a lot of material, but again, you are committing your own time and studying, and you've got to spend a lot with it. Toys. I'm a big fan of hacker toys. So this is the books. You buy a few, they're not too expensive. The toys, you've got your commercial grade ones, which are very, very, very expensive. And then you've got the ones that we talk about at these conferences, which are like mods or very cheap. And that's the realm that I live in. I don't generally do the commercial side ones. I try to think of whatever is, $50 and under, shooting for that $15 range kind of thing. So depending on what area you want to go into, everybody specializes in something. So those books are great, but most of them talk about network pen testing, which is awesome. But there's a lot, wireless, hardware, social engineering, web application, phone application. You don't do all of them. You have to pick and choose which ones interest you the most. Now, knowing a little bit about all of them is great, and you'll learn a lot about that by coming to conferences and stuff. But all of us have our fields of expertise, whether that was forced on us or we kind of chose that path. So if you're going to start playing around with things, focus on those tools. We've got a lockpicking village next door. If that's something you're interested in, there's a lot of physical security testing. Buy a pair of lockpicks. I go to thrift stores and buy locks because brand new locks are very expensive. Used locks are very cheap. So if you can find a place that has some old used locks, pick them up. While you're watching TV or just hanging out, you can practice that way. There again with the lab setup, certain tools you have to use in a real life environment, so it's a little harder. But if you're getting a wireless card, screw around with your own network. There's a lot of really cheap. Again, thrift store. There's a lot of old wireless routers out there. They're very cheap. Even new ones, going to the right store, ordering online, they can be very cheap. So setting up your own wireless router with WEP enabled, getting a wireless card, sniffing your own traffic, and cracking the password. That's something you can do at home, and that's fine because you're targeting your own equipment. The cost setup for that might be about $40, which isn't bad if you're saying, okay, this is a new career path I'm really excited about. Let me spend $40 and I'll get into it. So looking around. reading a lot of the websites, going to conferences, seeing what people post. A lot of the people that are speaking up here, again, are doing like modified or the cheap version of what might be a very expensive tool. My repository of hacker toys has become extensive over the years, but that's the good news is don't buy it all at once. Don't spend $2,000 to own everything. Just, $20 here and there, cycling through. You'll get to see what you like and what you don't like. Again, hacker toys is a very broad scope of things, but I would suggest investing in them a little bit, taking that first step into buying that wireless card that has the sniffing and AP options to it, or buying your first lockpick set and practicing around at home. Because I think that, more so than anything else, kind of having that physical thing in front of you that you're playing around with gets you going to that, tumbling downhill towards, you get the next tool, you figure out what space that you enjoy the most. I know I did that for wireless. I was a big wireless person, so I did a lot with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and I started, trickling, buying the tools, getting them cheap on Amazon or cheap on eBay. Sometimes a lot of that used stuff that's really expensive equipment gets posted on eBay because they cycle through the next version. They don't care what it sells for because, it's some company offloading. So you can pick up equipment that's high-end pretty cheap. And a lot of coming to these conferences and stuff, sometimes there's vendors that sell some of it, but definitely investing in some of them you have to make yourself, but they're not terribly difficult. So don't feel like it's a big hurdle to flash a router with OpenWRT. Sounds scary, and if you brick it, you might lose the $20 you spent on the router. But again, once you've created something, I found personally, once I've created something of my own, even if it was just flashing a router with new firmware, all of a sudden that became like my project. Like I've taken that first step, now that project is there, and it's always looming in the back of my head. Hey, this is sitting there, I made this thing, I better use it. Contribute back to the community. This is probably the biggest thing, and it's a big hurdle because it's very intimidating to decide I'm going to contribute back in a way, and it doesn't mean you have to, write a tool, create a 0-day, come up, speak about it, get trolled or get in the news and go on interviews. That's not. That happens sometimes, but that's really like a small niche of what you can do. If you don't know how to program at all, great. Help put on a conference. If you can design a website for a conference, if you can review the spelling of or if you can translate something, right? If you know Spanish or French and they want to release a broad scope tool, great, you can translate the README for them. That's contributing, because a lot of us that are creating the software side, that's what we want to do and that's where our focus is, but we just don't have the skill set to expand what we're doing. So whatever your skills might be, you don't have to be the great programmer of Oz to create something that works with Metasploit or your own separate tool. There's a lot of ways you can contribute. Ask around here. Chat with people at the conference, see what they're into, and say, hey, do you need any help? Well, what can you do? And list some of the skill sets, or just free time. A lot of times, all the tools most of the tools people are writing and publishing that people use, these are on people's free time. They're not getting paid for this. This is on the time that they have allotted out of their life to work on it, which is a finite amount of time depending on what else they've got going on. So sometimes it's just time to update something. Here, I've got this new thing. Could you write a little post about what it is? Done. You've got your name up there. You're contributing. You're getting invested, as you mentioned before, invested in kind of the community of security. So don't think that your skill sets are lacking, because everybody has something they can contribute, and then we just need to figure out what that is. Fail a lot. So if you fail at this, that's great, because we all fail at it. You got to own your failing, but you will fail, and you'll fail big, and you'll be embarrassed, and that's okay, because everybody here that has put themselves out there to contribute has failed, so they understand. You might get heckled a little bit, but ultimately they understand, because anybody who's stuck their neck out has failed in this community, and that's okay, because somebody will be there to say, hey, bug fix. Bug fix is great. You've got a bug here. I fixed it. That's a huge contribution. That makes this life so much better than I've got a bug. Like, if you can contribute the fix part, that's so much better than, I don't know what happened here, but I got this very generic error message. Can you recreate it? Well, that's going to take me like hours of debugging my own stuff. If you could do it in your environment and shoot me some, debug or what you're running this library, blah, 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 that would be very helpful. This isn't from the internet. I actually saw this at a hotel a few weeks ago and thought it was really, this is the kind of thing you like, you stop at and just like, I'm sure somebody had watched me and I was just staring at for a while and soaking it in, the enjoyment that I had found this was like, I know the button turns back, but I found it like that and it made me happy. This is another one that I saw. I flipped up. I was traveling and I got into the hotel room. I turned on the TV and I saw this. So I'm like scrambling to find my phone. I've got to get an image of this. And I don't know. Unfortunately, it doesn't like label which ones they are, like 1 through 5. So I don't know where this was. But we can just let our imaginations run on what the other 4, or at least one of the 4, might be. Yeah.
Where was this at?
I have no idea. Yeah. Wherever you can find a Fox 5 somewhere there, that's what I don't know. I mean, I haven't posted this anywhere. This was just in my private collection. An example of my fail. Who can tell me what's wrong with this badge? You're going to get it eventually. Look, you can kind of see it. People up front. What? I spelled Raleigh wrong. This was the badge for B-Sides Raleigh, and I spelled Raleigh wrong. To be fair, it was drawn. So there was no spell check for it, and well, it was in GIMP, so I typed it up. There's no spell check, and I did spell it right everywhere else that I wrote the word Raleigh except for the front of the badge. Even on there's a poster version of it, so instead of attendee, I hand drew Raleigh. That was spelled correctly, but no, of course, on the front of all the badges, I spelled Raleigh wrong. So I apologize profusely to them, but I got to own it, right? I have to okay, if that's what goes wrong this year, if that's the worst thing, that's fine. I can profusely apologize to everybody who has to look at that badge and be like, what the heck? Like, my local B-Sides, the city that I live in, spelled wrong. But it happens, and so I'm trying to own it. The resume. So a lot of this stuff is how you get your skill set in. That's my recommendation so far is, how are we on time? Are we like... Okay, cool, perfect. A lot of this is how to build yourself up, saying screw it to the rest of the world. These are my skill sets. This is how I'm going to go down my career path. You do, unfortunately, at some point have to hand out a resume, and I think the talk tomorrow sounds like, or later tomorrow, sounds like a lot on this. But to be fair, so I won't go into it too extensively, but there are definitely things you can put on your resume. And what I would suggest is actually going outside of the traditional resume format of these are the jobs I worked at, this is very specific skills that I have, I know these languages, and this is my degree, and I have these awards. Outside of that, I would actually put in there, I read this book. In our field, again, there's no certification. There's no official certification process. It's not like, being a contractor in a house. So you have to be certified to do certain things, or an electrician. We don't have that checkbox. We don't have that thing you can throw on your resume. There are certifications. I'll talk about that in a second. But adding things in that are sort of outside what you might traditionally put on that. Attended a conference. Speaking at a conference is great, but even just attending, it might not be super impressive to the HR, but when it goes up to the manager or whoever's hiring, they say, wow, you have consistently gone to conferences over the years. You've read these, again, 400-page books. That's a technical book. That's a commitment. And especially during the interview process, they might try to reference that stuff, and you sound a lot more impressive than what might just be coming through. So I realized this a little more recently, that adding that material in there, if it gets ignored, it gets ignored. That's fine. But it boosts credentials that are very difficult to show on paper, right? If you've been spending the last 6 months of your job doing security stuff, but your job title hasn't changed, then there's not a lot that you can show on a resume about it. So listing these other things that you've done sort of on the side, or assisted with project X, putting that on a resume is great. You can list what you did, but anytime you've contributed, they said, wow, you've gone above and beyond to get into security, that's a great thing to put on a resume. Other things for a resume, I forgot the slides of, so these are how to stand out, right? Adding those additional steps on your resume. This one made me so happy. I think this is probably a t-shirt. I'm sure it is somewhere, and I need to find it because it's great. So outside of the other boosting, showing that you can be a technical writer. So you don't have to necessarily publish something, but if there is training in that, but even without that, you need to write reports, which are boring and they suck. but you have to do that as part of your job if you want to go legit. Like somebody's going to be paying you to turn in something that they can understand. So you do have to learn how to format, not like spell check correctly and write novels. It's how to translate what you have done to somebody who might not be technical, or targeting, if it is extremely technical or the middle ground, you need to know how to talk to your audience and write it in a way that in the final report that gets handed to the C-level executive or your boss or whatever, they're happy with it. They understand some of the layers of what are going on and in general how to fix them. So you do have to write extensively in this process. So a lot of it's the fun side, but then at the end of the week or the month or the quarter or whatever, you're having to turn in some sort of report. So practicing that, I don't have a great method of doing that other than to say, what? Writing a blog. Writing a targeted blog. Yeah, he's saying writing a blog, that's a great idea. Because at least you'll be writing out to a security field. Yeah.
I had someone just on the basis of their blog, they blew the actual in the interview completely, but their blog was so well written and well researched, we have no doubt of that.
They're saying that people hired people just based on what they have published on their blog, because in the interview process can be extremely intimidating. I mean, I've been through several rounds of these things, and I've given them, and it can be intimidating, especially when you're coming up and all you've ever done is, of your VM lab environment. From my experience, people that have come from that have done the VM labs, that have never done pen testing before in their life, after a good 6 months, you're either in or out. I mean, a year, you're solid, but you either get on board, it's either something you find that you really are passionate about, and you go into it and you're spending your extra time learning about the tools outside of your job, or you're like, man, it's just not for me. And it's generally that 6 month gap, and after a year, you're a pro. I mean, you're a professional at that point. So it's not this really long hurdle of like the 4-year degree. You don't have to go through that like a 4-year process. You're either in or out, but technical reporting or technical writing skills, having that coming in is probably one of the few things you can't really learn along the way. I mean, you do, but you kind of have to have that day one. Because if you need a little help on your pen test, that's fine. But if you turn in a report that is awful, that gets noted like right away. I mean, if you're working with internally, or especially if you're working with clients or third parties, and they turn it back and they say, "What is this? We paid a lot of money for it." You'll hear from your boss very quickly. So writing a technical blog, I came from academia, helping out with publications is great because you go through a lot of revisions with that sort of thing. Certifications, there are a lot of certifications out there. They help a lot getting past HR. HR people see nothing but minimal requirements. And again, unfortunately, there's not a general purpose certification for what we do. So outside of your previous jobs in college, certifications look great on a resume. When you get past HR, it doesn't really matter. I mean, if you're doing government contracting, a lot of times they're very stringent on what you have to have as a minimum. Outside of government contracting, you can generally talk your way into something. As long as you get that interview, you can kind of move on. Certifications cost a lot of money in general in our field. My advice personally is if you have an employer willing to spend the money on you to do this, which a lot of times I have friends that have been system administrators that, the company wants them to get security training, so they're willing to spend the money to send them out or have them go to this training and get certified, even if that's not, they're not the internal red team or blue team. If you're doing it on your own, it's not really worth the money, because if it's going to set you back, if you've got a big stack of money on the side and it's something that interests you, go for it. I would consider it more, again, for the training, just like we talked about college. I would say I've done some. I learned a lot from them because I was really, focused on, I wanted to learn. But as far as the amount of money goes, these are generally week-long courses that they cost a lot because there's a lot that goes into them. So I wouldn't, refinance your house or something just to be able to afford 2 certificates in order to put them on a resume. But if you can take advantage of them at work, and I don't want to specifically talk about which certificates to get or not get. There's definitely one that you have to get if you want to work in government, and there's some that are. Let me open this up to the audience. The ones that are inexpensive, How do we feel about them? We probably know the ones I'm talking about, and I'm trying to be sort of specifically vague on them. But the ones that are very inexpensive, they actually seem, I personally, they kind of hurt a resume. I mean, they look great if you had it along with other, like you were doing an IT job and you have 7 other certifications that kind of parallel it, so you got it along the way, no problem. But if that's the only certificate you put on your resume that's just this particular security one, it kind of shows you had a little interest or you had some free time, but I would much rather see that you went to a conference or read a book. Like, I feel like you get a lot more out of that because that seems to be a lot more personal motivation. Yeah.
I think one of the things I should probably mention is that like the senior level certs that you're probably talking about actually requires practical experience and actual full experience in the workforce, whereas entry level stuff like the CompTIA A+ cert, all you do in that exam is
No comment. No, go ahead.
From what I've heard, all you do in the exam is like fill out multiple choice questions and all that stuff, and that's not really practical whatsoever, even for fixing a computer and whatnot.
So people that have hired before and how to get through HR, how do we feel about that? Because again, HR doesn't know what they want, what you want. They know what you've given them as a list, and it's hard to define that on a list.
Some of the certs, CompTIA is all the way up. It depends on how long you've had it. If you're an A+ from the early 90s, then HR is going to weigh it different, especially if you've got a whole bunch of other stuff to follow on. Actually, if it's that old, you may not even put it in your resume. You've got other stuff.
Keeping your certs up to date, if you have certs, to an extent.
Yeah, so, I don't know, we look at a lot of certs, but if I see somebody with Security Plus, or since somebody brought up CompTIA as the A+ on all those sides, it's a baseline, it depends on who I'm hiring. If I'm hiring a mid-level tech or an entry-level tech, that may be enough.
But if we're focusing on entry level, like, this is your first job in the field,
But if you're going for a CSO,
yeah.
plus is
Yeah, focusing mostly on, it doesn't hurt. It kind of gets, I'd say for HR it's great, but don't make that your big, this is what I've done to get into the field, like you're really having more than that. I'll open up a Q&A in just a second. So the last point I wanted to make is what you're doing right here. Coming to a conference, mingling with people, hitting them up on Twitter, emailing, making friends in the community. I can't tell you how many times that I've just bumped into somebody and, chatted with them and had inspiring ideas for either tools I wrote or new tools or collaborations. I can't imagine that I'd be where I am today without having come to a conference, because you get to talk at a level that you can't read. Like, you have a discussion that might last an hour that it took you, 3 days worth of time to read the book, but you had that one discussion that was like, oh yeah, wow, that really, okay, that's the fundamental of that wasn't explained to me ever before, because reading a lot is boring, but chatting with people that are in the field is actually pretty exciting. So if you're coming to these events, come to the talks, because we like it when people come to talks, but don't just go home afterwards, or don't just split for lunch. Hang around and chat with people. I would suggest, even if there's talks that don't specifically interest you, you can skip them. It is allowed. And chatting up with a stranger that you've never met before, sort of entering into the conversation. We're generally a very friendly crowd of people and very open to discussion, especially with, things that we are very knowledgeable about, or we'll make stuff up. That's fine. But really use the time you have as much as possible with this core group of people to learn what they've gone through. So I'll open it up now. Do we have a few minutes left, or 5 minutes left? Any open advice from people that are in the field? Yeah.
Get a mentor.
Get a mentor.
Get a GitHub and contribute.
Yes.
Get a Stack Exchange and participate.
Get a mentor. Get a GitHub or somewhere to publish your code. And what was the last one? Stack Exchange. Something to post. Blog posts, something that you can contribute, even user guides. So again, a lot of us, we write a tool and we think it's great and we post it out there, and then we never write anything good about how to use it, in deep details, because it's obviously it worked for me and I wrote it, so everybody else will figure it out on their own, which is really not the case at all. So even if you write that one post that's how to install the tool, sometimes that will get way more hits than you would expect, than the actual original page that posts the tool. They can go somewhere else and get it. It's a lot better, because we just don't have time for that kind of stuff.
I really want to echo what you said about open source contributions. Every
You're saying that having HR, if you are hiring, having HR just send everything flooding to you doesn't matter, because again, a lot of people that, I mentioned before, biologists. You could be a biologist that's a great hacker on the side, and that it doesn't show up in a resume at all. But as soon as you get that hour-long interview, how hard is it to, even if you say, all right, we're going to do a preliminary half-an-hour interview, like 5 minutes in, you're going to know, like, wow, this wasn't on your resume, but you're actually really into this stuff. It just doesn't show up well on paper. So I would absolutely, if you can get HR to tell HR, here's the position title, there's no qualifications required for it, just send whatever comes in based on that title, filter it all to me. If you can get through HR with that, I completely agree. I think that's absolutely awesome. And contributing, I definitely got my job because of my public work, not academia at all, but because I'd spoken at conferences and released some tools and met people that were hiring, and that they saw me and they'd used the tools before, and that was my way in. I mean, I didn't write tools to get in. I wrote tools because there was a space that was open, and I thought I could help out with contributing. But that's the biggest resume booster here. Plus mingling. If you really want a job, it's hard. Posting it online is not the greatest way. If you can bump into somebody here, is anybody here hiring right now? Okay, we have some people in a larger room. We would have just as many. It's hard to find people, right? I mean, people just don't apply, and I think a lot of it is that they don't feel like they might be of the skill level, but they don't feel like it because they never had a job in the field. It's really hard to break into, and that's why I gave this talk, because again, there's nothing that defines you as a pen tester prior to getting that first job. So it's really, really, really hard and intimidating to be in that interview process and be like, look, I just don't know. And that's fine. Just say, look, I've read about it before. I've never been able to get hands-on experience. I know what this tool does. I know what you're talking about, but here's where I'm at. If you're honest with people in general, you get that first little bit of time to try to get your sea legs, and they should be open to it. Thanks everybody for having me. I had a tool drop here that I wasn't able to post, and it should be up this weekend. I wrote a simple war driving scanner that doesn't use GPS. It's just basically naming logs. It's a very simple one, but I thought since I was releasing it here, I'd at least do an official SkyDogCon tool drop. So I really appreciate it. Anybody who had raised their hands as pen testers, and I'll be splitting soon, but chat with them about if you're interested in it. I mean, again, we're a very open community, and we need people. We need more people. You can't pull in enough people to actually go down this career path. So it's a great one to have. I've enjoyed it very much, and I think they would say the same thing. So thank you, SkyDogCon. Thanks for coming to talk.